What is up, everybody? Welcome to Destination the Show, episode 26. Jamie Cameron here with Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, what's going on? How are you?
Hi, I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm tired.
Well, it's because it's later where you are.
It's later where I am. I'm in Pennsylvania in a hotel room with some very mom's basement lighting.
That's true.
It's pretty bad. And this is as good as it gets, too. I experimented. I moved things around. I turned lamps. I'm using shirts to cover other lamps. It's not
Wow.
great.
Wow. It's big time.
Do you see the effort that I go to when I spend time with you? I hope
That's
I hope you appreciate it.
I really do so much.
Um Real quick, housekeeping before we dig in. We have so much to talk about today. I thought this was going to be kind of a low key episode, but we have news and notes to hit in earnest before we dig into Cubs prospects. Couple of housekeeping notes before we do that. You can find us on YouTube at Destination the Show. So definitely check us out there and subscribe on Twitter at DTS_pod1 and wherever you got your podcasts. We appreciate all the support that folks have given us. You can support us by downloading episodes, liking, subscribing, and interacting with our content in any way you see fit, even if it's an insult. Jeremy, Cody Bellinger, one of the four Borismen, is back with the Cubs essentially on the Carlos Correa deal, 3 years, $80 million with an opt-out after each of the first 2 years. So I guess my question for you, man, is this a failure for Boris?
So it's an interesting question because I think that two things are always going to be true. Scott Boras, more so than the players, can afford to take huge risks, right? And I think that's what happened. And I think another thing that's always true is that Scott Boras, the man of talented words, will always be able to spin things for a win.
For sure.
Right. But if you would have said 380 for Bellinger at the beginning of the offseason for the Cubs, is that
Dream
a win?
come true.
Absolutely a win for the Cubs. Would you say is that a failure for Boris? Yeah. Right. Now,
yes,
if he has a huge year, he opts out and we do this again next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he has a terrible year, he doesn't opt out, he's going to make it the money. So that's why it's why Boris can always spin it as a win, because he basically ensures his deals that they're always going to work out. And so great deal for the Cubs. Kudos to the Cubs for not blinking first, because that's what we talked about last week.
Yep.
And then they made a minor trade today to free up that roster spot for Bellinger.
Haven't even got around to putting that in the show notes, so that one's gonna have to wait for next time around. But yeah, they made a swap with the White Sox, I think, for bottom end of their top 30 guys. I agree. This is a failure for Boris for me. I mean, if you're Cody Bellinger coming off a 4.3456 F4 season, I forget exactly what it is, but it was in the fours. That has to be disappointing. And I think everything you say about spinning it is true and kind of hedging is true, but there's also 4 other Boris guys sitting out there who don't have jobs, who are coming off equally brilliant seasons. JD Martinez, Blake Snell, Matt Chapman doesn't have a job.
Did you say Montgomery?
I didn't say Montgomery. Montgomery, dude. Yeah, 100%. I don't know. I think the number of guys still out there from that kind of upper echelon in a really weak free agent class is indicative of the fact that across the league spending is down. I know the regional TV situation is a big deal for a lot of clubs, but I also think it's a reality of more and more pre-ARB players soaking up playing time. We're looking at spring training right now, and Wyatt Langford is battling for a roster spot on the Rangers. Someone's losing a job because of that, even though we're excited to see it. So I don't know. Great for the Cubs, though. I would be absolutely over the moon. Do we also have a trade? We have a trade to talk about. How do you feel about Manuel Margot?
So that's your leading question. That's where we're starting here, is how I feel about him.
How do you feel about him? He has a great smile.
Yeah,
It's
and
good
he was
vibes.
a prospect that was pretty highly regarded when I was really more serious about watching all the prospects in all of baseball. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's a name that was very familiar um, to me. So as far as a fit on the roster, perfect.
Yep. Okay. So let's talk. Let's tease out this whole thing. Manuel Margot and Rain Doncone and cash comes from the LA Dodgers in exchange for Noah Miller. What's your overall thoughts on kind of the value exchange, man? I'm curious because I know we've talked about Noah Miller on this pod a little bit. Margot is obviously a good fit for the right-handed platoon, solid defensive outfielder that the Twins wanted. Um, what's your thoughts on the deal as a whole?
So I guess I found it interesting that they went to the trade market when there's guys on the free agent market,
Yeah.
and as opening day approaches, those prices are obviously gonna do this, right? Um, but like I mentioned, I think Margot fits really well on this roster. So if they're kind of looking at it like, okay, what's the cost going to be versus the fit? If they view that he's the best fit, then I think that makes sense. They get cash from the Dodgers. They get the cash from the Rays, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it offsets a lot of what they owe him. I think I heard that the buyout next year is also covered by the Rays.
Yep.
There's very little financial commitment to him. Um, and they got a pretty highly not highly regarded prospect, but a lottery ticket, right? And
A
in
lottery
return, they
ticket.
gave up a lottery ticket type
A higher
for
floored lottery ticket?
well, yeah, because I mean he can certainly defend. So they like Noah Miller will be a major league baseball player.
I agree with that.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. But is he ever going to be like a top 15 prospect for his organization? No, right? Unless he really starts to hit, which I don't think there's any reason to believe that that's going to happen. You might say, "Oh yeah, but he had those months." Fine, but really, they paid a very small cost to get what they probably deem to be a perfect fit
Mm-hmm.
for their roster. So I think that's it's not exciting, but I don't know that anybody realistically would have thought that there was going to be some big exciting thing that
For
happened.
sure.
I think they know what they want with their roster and they went out and did it, and kudos to them for getting it done.
For sure. I love how you're pre-shading me about citing Noah Miller's month by month splits before it happens because you know what's coming.
I did. I
Um,
was well aware that you had that queued up.
yeah, just a couple thoughts on Miller, and then I want to talk about Don Cone a little bit. Um, Miller could play shortstop at the major league level tomorrow. Like,
Yeah.
not you said like he's a good defender, and like I know you didn't mean to undersell him, but he is a exceptional defender to the tune of being the best glove in minor league baseball in 2023. 16 defensive runs saved at shortstop, and that's on the same scale as it's measured in the majors. Next closest in the minor leagues was 8. So that's going to take you a long way. And like you said, like at very worst, he's going to be what a like defensive replacement bench role at the major league level. Certainly doesn't look like the bat is emerged yet. He's still pretty young. So maybe the Dodgers help him take a step forwards. But there's a ton of questions about the hit tool. I don't think he's ever hit more over like 260 in a single month in minor league baseball. But he'll be a bench bat no matter what.
Uh, you're saying his months. I love it.
Huh?
He's never hit over 260 in a month. Yeah, I mean, he's
in a month sample.
yeah, that and to break it down that far, what you're doing is you're really splitting hairs over a guy that's he's not ever going to be a major league hitter. And but there's so much value in players like that. And I think I threw out a page of Florm on the name last week or 2 weeks ago. Like if you can defend, there was just who was the guy that just he went bounce from the Cubs to the Twins to the um, to the Rays. I can't think of the guy. He had a real long first name, but like when you can defend, you can play in the major leagues, and
Mhm.
so he will be a major league player, but he wasn't ever going to be that for the Twins.
Theo is ripping you in the chat for bringing up Pedro Florimon every single episode, which
I'm gonna do
is
that.
like your equivalent of me citing Noah Miller's month-by-month splits.
No, not Harris. It was the guy that he just played. He was a waiver pickup. I don't know. It'll come to me.
Let's talk about Don Cone a little bit because I think you're right, he's a lottery ticket. You're right, he's a throw-in, but he is a little bit interesting. And I think he's being a smidge undersold by various folks who have commented on him so far. He does have some pedigree as a prospect and had some steam like not that long ago, right? He was signed by the Dodgers on the first day of the 2021 international signing period. Signed for a $500,000 bonus. That's not nothing. I'll say it's not like top guy money, but it's not nothing. Signed as a shortstop, really, really solid athlete. I think more viable as the third baseman, but like solid defensively, really good arm, average runner. First 2 seasons in rookie ball, he had a 132 WRC plus and a 110 WRC plus. His first season in the DSL, hit 283, 387, 455 with 14 home runs in low A last year as a 19-year-old. So he struggled a ton in low A. He was still pretty young for that age, for that level, excuse me. He can mash fastballs. Doesn't sound like he can hit much else yet. Definitely struggles with the breaking stuff, but I don't know. To me, all of that adds up to yes, lottery ticket. Yes, you're taking a flyer. Yes, more than likely he doesn't work out, but there's at least a little intrigue there to me that brings him like a half step up from just like a complete toss in that has very little organizational value. I don't know if you agree with that or
Oh
not, but
yeah, 100%.
yeah.
And the really hard part though, like if you look at the trade and it was like, okay, so and so ranked Noah Miller here,
Mhm.
so and so ranked on Cone here. Like they don't. That's not really apples and apples,
For sure.
right? So how you view that, you know, view ceilings to floors, and so the thing that always will be something that when trades happen, like the Dodgers saw something in Noah Miller that made them want Noah Miller,
Mhm.
right? And the same is true from the Twins' perspective. Like they were going to get something back, and there was something that they liked more about Rain Don Cone than the Dodgers or than the other teams or whatever. Like that's why you're trading for guys. So
Mhm.
does he kind of fit this stereotype that the Twins are like, let's find guys that can hit. Let's see how we can develop them as hitters. We'll figure out the defensive thing later.
Mm.
Because I think that's kind of the truth of this, right? There's raw
Interesting.
power, there's the ability to identify and hit fastballs, but can he like does he even know what a slider looks like? This is like the whole Torrey Hunter story, right?
Mhm.
Like he comes back to the dugout and says, "How come that ball had a dot on it?" And it's like, yeah, Torrey. So I think it's all developmental part here, and so that's where it just it'll fit well. And I don't know, like how does he fit? Where do they put him defensively? Does it matter? Do they bounce him all over the place?
Mhm.
But yeah, I think we talk lottery tickets when it's like guys that haven't come stateside yet.
Right.
And in this case, he did it for at low A at 19, and let's see what happens after that. And I think Keith Law said, he's got a ceiling to be a major league regular and the floor to fizzle out before Double A.
For sure. That's so many guys.
Yep. Yep. And on a guy like this, it's both of those are very believable,
Yep.
right? And that's what makes it interesting.
Right on. Well, that sounds like it's the Twins done for the off season. Dude, I know. So we got to talk Cubs prospects, and we're definitely gonna fit it all in. But we got to talk some college baseball first.
Yep.
Dude, Drew Burris, who was 127 123rd on the consensus board in the 2023 draft. Hit 4 home runs in a game today for Georgia Tech as a freshman. 9 on the season.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
My question is, after dude hits like two, definitely after he hits three, what are you even doing? Throwing
Yeah,
anything near him?
for sure.
And
Crazy.
so, but the thing is, with when freshmen go crazy, we can't give him too much time because he's not going to be draft eligible this year for sure.
26.
He's not going to be draft eligible next year in most cases. So unless he's transferring out or doing something, yeah, fun story. But there's so much time for your draft stock to crumble when you're a freshman.
100%. Speaking of draft stock,
Yes.
we should talk about Hagen Smith real quick because yesterday, the struggle of me adjusting to the Eastern time zone. Last week, we asked folks, like, how do you, we're ready to start diving into draft content. How do you want to dig in? And I have made some significant progress with blurbs, write-ups, reports for the consensus board, such that we now have a consensus top 25. So I figured, I know it's very exciting. I figured we could talk about a guy today, and just kind of preview a little bit what these consensus board write-ups look like, and preview how we're going to kind of talk through some of these pitching prospects and other guys in this 2024 draft class if you're down.
If I'm
So,
down,
yeah.
I'm always down.
Okay. So did you see Hagen Smith's performance against Oregon State / catch any of the highlights / see his pitching line?
So here's the deal. You know that I wasn't watching the game because I was announcing a basketball game. And you knew that I was announcing the basketball game because when you sent me a message, you said, dude, I know you're announcing a basketball game, but you have to check out what Hagen Smith is doing. I see that. I'm like, okay, well, headset's on. I'm trying to announce what could have potentially been my daughter's last high school basketball game.
Well, did she win? Hold on.
They won Friday. They won Saturday.
Yes.
They play Thursday night. They're 2 games away from the state tournament.
Oh, heck yeah. Let's go.
So no, I didn't see it at the time. But when for me, like early, like if it's coming through my timeline, because I don't follow a ton of people, and that's not like personal to anybody or whatever. I just don't follow a ton of people because I like to just be able to get through a day.
Jeremy's a Twitter snob, everyone.
Sure. I mean, if that's what you want to call me. But there was so much Hagen Smith stuff. And only like 30% of it was you retweeting things. But there was it was prominent baseball people that are like, dude, you got to check this guy out. And it was a nasty thing to see in February. And it wasn't against, the school of the poor. It was against a legitimate Division I ranked heavy hitting lineup, and he was as good as maybe any college pitcher's been over the last handful of years in a single game, which is absolutely nuts.
Yeah, it was nuts. It was. So let's talk about that real quick. Give a couple of notes on what his kind of write-up looks like in the board, just to give people hopefully a taste of what this looks like. So Hagen Smith, left-handed pitcher, pitches for Arkansas, a very storied like prep prospect. He threw 7 no-hitters in his senior year in high school in Texas before going to Arkansas. In this game against Oregon State, who, as you mentioned, are no joke of a lineup. They're like a top 10 team, featuring a top 3 draft prospect, mind you, and Travis Bazzana, who's already hit 5 home runs this season. 6 innings, 78 pitches, 0 runs, 17 strikeouts, and he had struck out 9 guys through 3 innings, 12 guys through 4 innings, and 15 guys through 5 innings.
Yeah, that 6th inning, he really ran out of gas.
Insane. 25 whiffs in all on 78 pitchers on 78 pitches, excuse me. So he is going to be one of probably 2 guys who's vying for the top left-handed pitcher on the board, along with Jonathan Santucci, who's a lefty out of Duke. Fastball, started his college career at like 93-ish miles an hour. He's been flirting with 100 now in fall ball and coming into the spring. He has this kind of like funky, like Josh Hadery type delivery. So it's like a
Yep.
weird look for
Mhm.
hitter. He usually has the look, right? Like the long hair. But he's like he falls into the category of electric stuff, a ton of reliever risk that I feel like is true of a lot of college starting pitchers. Of his like 17 Ks, I think 15 were on the slider, but it was absolutely dominant. It was ridiculous, and it was head turning for sure. So that's Hagen Smith.
Yeah, I mean, you want to keep talking about him.
I do want to keep talking about him, but we got to start talking about Cubs. And the Cubs are dueling Cubs top 20 list. And you know what? We're going to have weeks and weeks and weeks to dig into college prospects.
But can I
So,
just, I want to ask this question because I posed it to you on Twitter and you never responded because one of us is a Twitter snob and one of us isn't. You have a better grasp on other people's draft rankings than probably they have on their own. I mean, because you update, right?
mhm,
And so not that there's a lot of updates happening quickly here, but a guy like Hagen Smith, who is a projected first round pick, right? And
mhm.
that's kind of broad, but that's kind of where we're at. Like, how does a guy do that on a Friday night in February and then not feel this whoosh of, now all of a sudden he's a prospect. Like Skeens wasn't the guy last year to start the year.
Mhm.
Chase Dolander was the guy that we all talked about. And it didn't take Skeens very long to just become the dude. So, like, where do you put Hagen Smith right now? Because he's a projected first round pick. But
Mhm.
how high could he possibly go?
Yep. That's an interesting question. So I can tell you of the boards that I've updated for him where he ranks or his range, right? He's as high as 14, as low as 30 on the boards that I use as inputs for the consensus at the moment. So a decent range. Um, and with guys like him, I think there's always going to be that level of variability for a couple of reasons, right? One is like, can you throw enough strikes with consistency? And two, for a lot of these guys, there's also a question about like the development of a consistent third pitch, which you're going to need to be a successful starter at the pro level. Um, I think how high he can go is all about the level of consistency he can execute with for the rest of the season. In his first start, he only pitched 1 inning, gave up 4 runs, got yanked immediately. And so I wanted to overreact to this performance, but the reality is we'll come back to him after like week 8 and take a look and see how things have settled in. But in terms of pure stuff and ceiling, he is up there with the Chase Burns's, Brody Brecks of this class as probably a top 3 arm. And I think the ceiling is probably like a top 10-ish profile, like the low end of the top 10. Obviously, it's super early to try and predict that. There's a lot of time between now and then, but those are the debates that we're going to get to have between now and July and agonize over like 100 such cases of interesting prospects.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the Chicago Cubs. Last week we did the Brewers. This week we're doing the Cubs. Next week we're doing the Twins. We're going to have Theo on to talk Twins with us next week. So we'll do this exactly the same way, man, that we did this last week. So super fun. We'll kind of unveil like a cluster of guys at once, and then there's definitely some questions, points of disagreement that I want to get your insights in, where we disagree on a guy, you see a guy higher, I see a guy higher, so on and so forth. And we'll just chop it up over a few guys at a time. So what's your like elevator pitch, like 2 sentence like headlines on the state of the Cubs system? Because it's been a minute since we talked kind of in depth about the Cubs and kind of the farm overview with Matt Shoeblood way back a couple months ago.
So for me, it's that they're heavy at the top, like super strong heavy at the top, and then it kind of just fizzles after that.
When you say the top,
Like they're top 10,
okay,
11-ish. but I mean, they're elite in the top 5, 6, 7.
Mhm.
But yeah, we'll get more into how I feel about the whole system. But their top 8 to 11, if you pick a number, is could go up against any other organization in baseball and probably be the better of the better of the teams.
Agreed.
It's for real.
Okay, so let's dig into the first few guys. Number one, we're aligned here. Center fielder Pete Crow Armstrong. We always joke about him getting plate appearances. He's going to get plate appearances this year. Can't wait to see what that looks like. Impact's going to be from speed and defense at the very least, regardless of how the offensive tools shake out. Number two, you had Cade Horton, right-handed pitcher, and I had Matt Shaw. And in fact, we flip-flopped here. So you had Shaw at 3, who you listed as a shortstop, which I'm saying, which is very funny. And I have Cade Horton at 3. So like, I feel like we're splitting hairs here because I know that we're both big fans of both of these guys. But why did you rank Horton over Shaw?
So for me, I I think I just gave Horton the edge because he's a potential ace,
Yeah.
right? And if you're telling me Matt Shaw's not a shortstop, then there's that middle of the diamond value that he loses. So potential ace, and he was a little bit better at Double A than Shaw was. Um, but I very much think that they're in the same tier, and that
Mhm.
tier is pretty high. And they're probably not that far off from Pete Crow Armstrong, if we're being honest about things. And I think Armstrong's going to be more uh, of a slow burn type thing, right? Where it's going
Mhm.
to take some time. When Cade Horton makes his major league debut, it's going to take the league by storm pretty
Yep.
quick. I mean, he might have some clunkers, but he's going to do some things where it's like, did you see what Cade Horton did? And I think that's why he gets the nod. Me and for Matt Shaw, like I really liked him as a draft prospect. If when the Twins talked about the Twins didn't talk about, but when Gonzalez was being rumored, I was like, Matt Shaw's the infielder. Matt Shaw's the infielder.
Mhm.
Um, but I think they're both probably top 35 prospects in baseball, and
Definitely.
how you want to rank them is entirely fine to me. 2 and 2A, but could be number ones and probably should be number ones in a lot of different organizations.
Agreed. Do both of those guys play in the majors in 2024?
Horton, I think, does for sure. Shaw, a little less sure of, just because of the infield depth that they have. Maybe
Mhm.
not so much at third base, but um, the depth that they have and the prospects that they have as well. I think there's more of a, you'd have to break through more of a jam to get major league plate appearances.
Yeah, right on. Okay. Okay, let's talk about the next group of guys because I feel like this is where the conversation starts to get a little more interesting. I gotta say, I am a little surprised we're aligned on number 4 too. And I'm surprised here because there are folks that don't have this guy as a top 100 prospect, which I think is nuts. So number 4, we had outfielder Kevin Alcantara. Um, just a ton of tools, elite athlete, going to be a monster if he puts it all together. 5, we both had Michael Bush, who we're going to list as the first baseman here. 6, you had Owen Casey, outfield slugger, and I had catcher Moises Ballesteros. Um, Again, we're like relatively aligned in this top 10 or 11 cluster, which is just incredibly, incredibly deep. I think you like Casey a little more. So tell me what appeals to you about him. I'm curious.
Yeah, I think it's just the consistent performing. I mean,
Mhm.
2022 wasn't great, but 2023 Double A hit 289, 22 bombs, strikes out a lot. But there's a bat that's going to play. Um, he wasn't great in the AFL, and I think that's something to be watched. So maybe pump the brakes a little bit. But he's a top 100 guy, and you can't ignore
Mhm.
what he's doing. They have so much outfield depth that you wonder, when they need to go acquire something now that Bellinger's back in the fold,
Yeah.
which one of these guys is the trade chip to bring the piece in July or whenever they decide they got to go get it, and what they want. They have the means to go and do it. So Yeah, I'm a little bit higher on him just because I think I sometimes get scared off by catchers too. So
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I mean Casey, like you're right. The strikeouts is a lot of strikeouts. Who I don't really care that much about strikeouts. 164 and 120 games at Double A. He was young for the level. He performed better in the second half. I think he might be a platoon bat, which is fine against right-handed pitching. Long term, I'm also uncertain about like what is his defensive home, and so that brings me to something else that I wanted to ask you about. And I don't think it's I think we could say it's relevant here, right? Because um, I have a catcher in this sixth spot, but I don't necessarily think that's just about defensive value. But how do you factor evaluating defense when you're trying to rank prospects in a system? Like, is that a big consideration for you? A small consideration? Is it something you use as a tiebreaker? I'm curious how you think about that because I think in general baseball analysis, um, defense is still pretty under talked about, and defensive positional value is still maybe a little underweighted.
yeah, and I think it depends on the situation and the organization. Um, because if you're an elite defender, that counts for quite a bit. But you only have if you only have defense, what does that really do? You're not going to ever be a regular as an elite defender unless
Maybe
you're.
Noah Miller.
But that's like one of the things, right? But um, if you're a terrible defender, like you don't have a position, but the bat plays
Hmm.
in this day and age when every team has a DH and you can not shift like you used to be able to shift, but still move guys enough to be serviceable,
Hmm.
you can find a spot for almost anybody. And I think that's what we've seen. And with a lot of organizations, especially, I mean, in my opinion, at least two of the three organizations that we talk about, they've really kind of valued position, you the ability to move around, flexibility more than being really really good at one position.
Hmm.
And so that's the other thing to weigh. It's not just like how much you weigh their defensive ability, but if you could be the right fielder one day and the third baseman the next day, or the center fielder than the second baseman, like that's even more valuable than being really, really, really good at one position if you're passable at two.
Hmm.
And that's where I think analytics has kind of entered into the realm here too, because the thing is, if you can hit the ball, there's going to be a spot for you,
Hmm.
uh, and I think that's the most important thing. And then the defense is just kind of the icing on the cake.
See, I don't think that so it's interesting that you brought that up because I don't think I really do a good job of that when I'm thinking through prospects, right? I tend to think about like, oh, P. Crow Armstrong, he's a center fielder. That's what he is, as opposed to considering the possibilities of what else he could be. And in his case, that's like not a very good example, right? Because center field is a premium defensive position. You want to keep him there. But I think you have a great point, right? Like, and the Twins do this a lot. And I think they're leaning into it even more with their kind of infield prospect log jam a little bit, even after trading away Jorge Polanco, thinking through where else a guy could fit and at least be like a solid average defender is worth a ton. Um, all right, so let me ask you this question because this was a fun one when we talked to Brewers last week. We're going to cluster this kind of top six together. I think is like tier one. I think that's fair. Um, which of these guys are you the most interested in watching in 2024 and why?
So if I had to just pick one, which is the assignment, I would pick Cade Horton. And really because pitchers fall on the schedule, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you'll know when they're going to pitch. You can make that appointment viewing. Um, how good is he? How quickly is he really really good? And how quickly does he get moved into a major league position? And I think that's why the pitchers are an easier one to watch. If I had to pick a second guy that's or maybe a different reason, like Michael Busch is going to be really interesting to watch because he's going to be more than likely the everyday first baseman on what could be
Mm-hmm.
a really, really good team as a rookie. And so more of a fascinating situation there. But Horton for me, because I think there's a very, very high ceiling, and if he's clicking, it could be a whole lot of fun for Cubs fans.
The other thing about Horton that's interesting, and I'll give you mine in a second, though, is if he comes up and is great, we were speculating about who would the Cubs trade and for what kind of help. The help that jumped to mind for me immediately was like playoff rotation type help that I still think the Cubs could use. But if Horton comes up and is incredible, that potentially alters what they need if they find themselves competitive near the top of the NL Central and in the hunt for a playoff spot, which they should based on what they've done this offseason, I would say.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, and this is definitely putting the cart way before the horse, Cade Horton's not going to throw 200 innings this year, right? And so even if he comes up and he's dynamite, there's going to be some protection on his arm. Like he threw 88 innings last year. He wasn't a full-time pitcher at Oklahoma. Like there's just a lot of stuff I think that needs to be considered. So even if he is as good as he could potentially be, I don't know if you're going to be able to say we're going to count on him through August, September, and October, right? Having only thrown 88 professional innings, there's going to be a limit. I don't know what that limit is, if it's 140 or whatever, but they have the means to go get dudes, and it would probably still be a pitcher. You could just maybe look at it like we'll pay less of a premium to get a guy in an expiring deal versus we need that guy with a year of team control, because that I think would be Wade. But again, that's way into the future and something we can talk about later.
I think mine is Alcantara. He was the dude who I was most interested in watching in the AFL, and the Cubs really sent a very interesting group of prospects to the AFL this fall. I just for me, I feel like we can both appreciate this. Alcantara is the guy where you can dream on the upside and be like, man, if he puts it all together, he is going to absolutely rake and dominate and do everything and just be like a 5-win player consistently, which obviously is a long shot. Obviously that's not the most likely outcome, but upside wise, he's fascinating to me.
So how big does he, he's 6'6". Right now, MLB lists him at 6'6", 188, and he looks like a string bean.
Right.
Like, if he gets to like 230, it's gonna be freaky. Like you think about what
Royce, it's like getting on for like Aaron Judge. This is like a couple inches shorter than Aaron Judge size, dude.
Well, there's a reason that I didn't specifically say that guy's name. But like if you look at Royce Lewis's body 3 years ago and Royce Lewis's body now, it's like there was a boy and now there's Royce Lewis the man.
Yep.
And Alcantara looks like a boy.
Yep.
And he's hitting. What were his numbers in Double A last year? Well, he had 13 home runs over three levels. But it's like there's going to be more power
for sure.
And he can steal some bases. Like there's a ceiling there that is very, very high. And it's not just because he's 6'6".
And that's why I'm so interested, right? Because he has all the tools, right? But then, like you say, the physical projection is not done there. And can he keep everything that he's doing well and add to that while his body grows and changes? Can he keep his swing short enough at 6'6"? Like so many interesting aspects to his development that I think we're going to find out the answers to in 2024. Big year for him. Okay, let's move on to the next two guys. Number 7, you had James Triantos, infielder. I had Owen Casey here. 8, you had Ballesteros. I had James Triantos. Does he still feel like the most tradable asset to you if you are the Cubs looking for help? Because he had an incredible AFL, and credit to you because you picked him as like, this is going to be the guy he's going to absolutely mash. I mean, the dude can really, really hit. He just doesn't feel like he has a home defensive position future on this current Cubs roster. Does he still feel like the most tradable guy to you? I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
He feels like there's kind of that excess value, right? Because Matt Shaw's there, and where does he fit? I don't know what the solution is at third base for the Cubs right now, like long term. And if
Mhm.
that's Matt Shaw, then yeah, Trianos doesn't really fit. Um, but I with Bellinger back, I think the outfielders also feel like they could be expendable. Now, I'm not saying that they're just we're going to turn and give these guys away, because I think we've seen that with teams where it's like we have all these guys and then one gets hurt and he's always hurt, or uh, there's no problem with having depth, but I think when you look at that, it pushes everybody down a rung, right? When you have Shaw and Trianos, and then we have Rojas. It's like you push down. It's like, oh, that's our fourth best shortstop. Where do you
Mhm.
think could be another organization's second? And then a team might call you and say, hey, that's a guy that we can get. Um, so yeah, I think Trianos could certainly be moved, because I don't know that his home is at short. I don't know where his defensive home is at all. But teams that really value the hitters, and there are teams out there, would call and say, hey, what's it going to take? But I
Mhm.
don't think the Cubs are real. They have in the past, but I don't know that they're real eager to trade some of these guys, because their
No.
upside is
I
especially high.
I don't think they needs to be in a rush now, especially with the Bellinger re-signing, right? Like that's I think kind of tipped them over the edge a little bit in the NL Central. We'll see how that plays out, because I feel like you could make a decent argument for anyone not named Pittsburgh winning that division. Um, but yeah, the Cubs can be as patient as they want. Hold on to all your prospects. Um, okay, let's go through a couple more guys, and then I think it's going to be like a logical point to ask you just kind of how you see the system as a whole, because right off the top, you kind of said, and I think we maybe feel a little differently about this, that the Cub system is a little bit kind of top heavy, and you like this middle chunk a little less than I do. And we've talked a little bit about this before in kind of comparing the Brewers and the Cubs system, which are, equally legit at the moment. Um, 9, we both had Jordan Wicks, left-handed pitcher, will graduate from this list soon. 10, right-handed pitcher Ben Brown, incredibly explosive stuff. A lot of reliever risk there, I think. 11, Jefferson Rojas, shortstop prospect. 12, we differ here. You have Michael Arias, a pitcher. I have Alexander Canario, someone who's already spent time at the major league level. 13, you have Matt Mervis. You fold in the like forgotten about guys a little bit higher up than I do. So 13, you have Matt Mervis, first baseman. I have Drew Gray, left-handed pitcher, who I'm super high on, and then 14, you have Brennan Davis, and I have Michael Arias slotted in right there. So you kind of mentioned this next group that you're maybe not quite so keen on. Do you see this kind of next chunk is interchangeable? What are your thoughts on how this plays into the system as a whole?
So it's not that I think this last chunk wasn't great. I feel like the top 11-ish guys is so strong that that's probably where most top 5 to 7 from or other organizations fit, right? They just have more guys in that range,
Mm,
probably like the top 200 type prospects, that they have 11 of these guys, where it's probably, you do the math, 7 of them per organization. So they have more there. But then when you're talking about like top 500 prospects in baseball,
mhm,
I just feel like they don't have the volume that most teams do. Maybe not even top 5 or top 700, like that, where it's like when you get to the top 15, there should be this bigger tier, and I just don't feel like they have it. Like that's why Matt Mervis. It's like, well, he's been there. It's a higher floor, not much of a ceiling. Brennan Davis was a really impressive prospect, and then his struggle, I think, staying healthy with a lot of stuff. Um, and then it was just like a fall off for me. And that's not to say that it's not a good organization, because it does. But when I got past the 15, I'm like, I feel like there should be a whole bunch of guys in that tier. And for me, it was like there just wasn't that big group of dudes.
mhm.
Um,
You
and I,
know why there's not a big group of dudes there? Because they're all in the top 150.
which maybe, and that might be it. Like there's just that gap, right? When you're going down the list, and there's going to have to be greater gaps because their high guys are that much higher. But that's just where it kind of got for me. And like Arias for me was just a guy that I like. He's got some nasty stuff, and so like that's kind of the end of my when I got to 14, I was like, well, that's where I feel like, well, that's kind of a separate group, and
Mm-hmm.
fair or not, right or wrong, that's just where I was.
Yeah, so you're definitely a little higher on Arias than I am. Curious for any more thoughts you have on him. I haven't spent a ton of time watching him, so you're probably more familiar with the stuff than I am. Um, but anything you're particularly drawn to about his profile, other than, I mean, just looking at this list, right? You have obviously Horton close to the majors, Wicks gonna graduate from prospect status soon. Not a ton of pitching, like pretty position player heavy in this top chunk of guys.
Right. So Arias, I think it's a lot of projection.
Hmm.
It's the nasty stuff, converted fielder, um, and it's hard to teach or just have that natural ability to just manipulate the ball the way that he does. Doesn't always know where it's going to go, which is a problem, and that's why there's this huge variance. But um, you got to stay patient with guys like that because you never know how it's going to line up. That's why the Johan Santana's going the Rule 5 draft, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like just we're not gonna stay patient. And a thing that I maybe skew my value towards a lot is like, what are the indicators
Mm.
of value? And when you take a guy that didn't have a ton of like statistical success, not that it's, I mean, some of the stats are good, some of the stats aren't. But when you take someone like that spent a year at low A ball, who is 3 promotions from the major league, and you have a 40-man roster that's pretty packed, and you find a way to keep him, right?
Good point.
That tells you that the indication is that within the organization they value him because they don't want to lose him. And they also believe that other people saw enough out of him that they would try to find a way to keep him on their roster.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that's a big thing where it's like, this isn't a guy that's like close to the majors where we want him on that shuttle, right? This is a guy that's not going to play in the majors, but we need to keep a 40-man spot reserved for him for the next potentially 4 years that he can be on an optional assignment because he hasn't put in his 5 years of professional experience. He'd qualify for a fourth option. And it's like, so we're committing 4 years or as much time as we need to see what he has before we move on from him. And that's why in the expansion draft piece that I did, like he'd be a guy that an expansion team would target because you throw him in your minor leagues, you try to develop him, and if it works out, we have a dude. If it doesn't, well, it's okay because it's just another pitcher that failed, which happens all the time.
Yeah, that's solid rationale. I dig it. Okay, let's talk about the next two guys. 15, you have Alexander Canario. I have Matt Mervis at 15, and then 16, you have Drew Gray, left-handed pitcher, and I have Jackson Wiggins, right-handed pitcher. And as I was thinking about this, man, I was like, dang, this is like betraying Jeremy because I feel like I talked a lot of S about the Jackson Wiggins pick when we spoke about it and how I didn't really like going over slot for a guy. So I have Wiggins at 16. Spoiler, you have him down at 20. What's your view on him? Like, is he just kind of like a throw-in because the upside is high guy for you? I'm curious what your thoughts are on him.
So you weren't a fan of it at the time. I wasn't a fan of it at the time. And again, I'm not this part of the Cubs system just isn't super exciting to me. But they went upside with Wiggins. They were willing to pay more than slot for Wiggins. So I tried to recognize that it's a Cubs value thing a little bit. And on the other side of that is if he wasn't on this top 20 list, I feel like that would be a little disheartening for Cubs fans to look at a top 20 and not see your second round pick. So obviously it's more on like, okay, what they saw to draft him because there wasn't anything else to go on. Right. But it's an upside pick and you hope that he heals properly and that he'll be something. And once they traded Ferris, it's like you've kind of thinned out your pitching depth.
Yeah.
Right? Um, and so maybe they have high hopes for Wiggins that he's going to move up this list. But yeah, I think you and I are on the same page with him. It's not. He's never going to be someone. Hopefully, he's someone that we can sit here and say, yeah, we were way wrong on him.
Yep.
I just don't feel like that's going to be the case.
Yeah, so he's like my Arias on this list of just like the stuff is legit. He's healthy now. I still don't love how they use the pick, although I like it better when you view it in conjunction with the Matt Shaw pick, because the Matt Shaw pick felt like such a sure thing of the really good college bats that it felt better to me then, or I felt more okay with like taking that risk. I'm just intrigued because of the stuff. He's finally healthy. He just feels like a guy who could be in the top 10 easily this time next year if he's healthy, if he's effective. Obviously, that's asking for a lot from a guy who hasn't pitched in a year. But upside wise, uh, Wiggins is someone who could definitely take a leap. Okay, we're getting close to the end here, so let's go through our like 17 to 20 guys, and then I want to ask you another question that we kind of talked about with the Brewers and was a fun topic last week. So 17, you have Dernish Valdez, shortstop. I have Pedro Ramirez listed as second baseman, third baseman. 18, you have BJ Murray, third baseman. I have Luke Little, a left-handed pitcher. 19, you have listed Christian Hernandez, shortstop. I have BJ Murray, third baseman. And then 20, as we mentioned, you have Jackson Wiggins. And I have Pablo Eliendo, a catching prospect who I believe we talked about when we were previewing guys to potentially protect from the Rule 5 draft way back when. So let's do the same thing that we did last week, and I want to widen it up a little bit because I realize I've pigeonholed myself here a little bit in a way that I don't want to. Let's take like the 12 to 20 range. Who's a guy you feel like is maybe flying under the radar here, that folks should know a little bit more about, that you're intrigued about for 2024, and why?
Yeah, so BJ Murray for me,
Mm.
putting my list together and looking at different names and seeing different prospects, he was just someone that kind of stood out as man, I feel like we should have been talking about this guy. Had a really, really good 2023. And if he can build on that, he'll be knocking on the door for the Cubs, right? Which he's 24. But the whole story is pretty remarkable for a guy that was drafted out of college as a 15th round pick
For
and,
sure.
and played in the futures game. Is he a third baseman? Is he a first baseman? He's 5'9" ish, right? And so he's a unique type of player,
Mm-hmm.
but doesn't have any super great tools. 16 home runs last year in 124 games. Had a few strikeouts too, 129. But has just hit, like he hits. And I think that if you have a guy that hit and he's a switch hitter, if you have a guy that can hit, you can find a spot for him. And with questions at first base and third base, right? Michael Busch, less of a question because but he's a rookie.
Mm-hmm.
And then who's going to fill third base? Like he's a guy that might get a chance before the Matt Shaws of the world, just because it's going to be like, well, let's see what we have with this guy. We're not going to rush him because he spent, I believe, the whole year at AA last year. Yeah, 124 games at AA. So you're looking at probably playing in Iowa. He's probably a phone call away. And so that's just the story and the potential, and being 5'9", 5'10", not your prototypical 6'4" masher. I think just makes that to be a fun story,
Yeah.
at least storyline to watch for the season.
I want him to play first. I want a 5'9" first baseman. I need Luis Ariz again.
And we've seen him.
So I messed this up so badly because I was like, originally how I listed this question out was like someone in the 16 to 20 range. And then I realized I picked someone who was my 13th pick, which feels kind of bogus, but I felt like I got a share on him anyway.
That's cool. You make the rules, you can break the rules.
Mine is Drew Gray, who I feel like is pretty underrated. We talked a little bit about pitchers on the Cubs list and maybe there not being that much excitement when you get past Horton, and when you get past Jordan Wicks and Ben Brown. But Drew Gray is really interesting to me. Lefty, high spin fastball guy, plays well at the top of the zone. He throws that from like a lower slot. He's also really good at spinning the ball. So he has like a pair of interesting breaking balls, a really like sharp biting curveball and a slider. And I just think for a back end of a top 20 guy, he has 3 above average pitches already. Like all 3 of those, fastball, curveball, slider, I think would grade out as above average, and definitely like some projection left there, to put on some weight, to add some velocity. And I think that's the kind of deal that I'm interested in taking a bet on a little bit further down the list. So the performance has been fine so far, but he's the type of guy who I would say like watch out for a potential breakout from Drew Gray, because the stuff and the tools there, it is kind of a package to be successful potentially at the major league level.
Right, and I think in his case, was drafted through 4 innings, blew out his arm in spring training the next year, missed the whole season, came back at some point last year, threw all of 34 innings. So I mean that's those the types of prospects that this happens to. I mean, the road can go one way or go the other way. And it's like, where did that get? We didn't see that guy even coming. It's like, well, there's a reason for that. And I think, yeah, he fits in that category where it's like, if healthy, how good could he be? And a lefty too. Like that's
icing on the cake.
Yeah. Because if you're a lefty and you can, if you're a left-handed pitcher and you can breathe, you got a chance. And if you're a left-handed pitcher and you can breathe and you can spin a couple breaking balls, well, that could be a problem.
That's interesting for sure. It's definitely an interesting profile. All right, so let me ask you this bonus question. Although I feel like this is much more difficult for the Cubs, but this will be kind of our last one here before we preview next week and wrap it up. So last week I asked you about the Brewers, who you feel like is most likely to be a consensus top 100 prospect who currently isn't in their system. I feel like for the Cubs, this question is really hard for a couple of reasons. One, some outlets have the Cubs with like 7 or 8 top 100 guys. Others have them with like 4 or 5. So there are already guys that potentially aren't consensus top 100 guys. So I'll kind of widen it, right? So you can answer it that way, or you can answer it as like, who do you think that we've talked about is most likely to kind of take the leap, and kind of vault themselves into that conversation who might not be there now?
Well, and maybe it's just like, is Trianos a top 100 guy? He's on a couple lists. He's not on all the lists, right? So as you go down the list, I think the guy that has a chance to jump the highest would be Jefferson Rojas.
Mm-hmm.
So 18 years old. He looks the part. He's small right now, 5'10", 150. But as far as his stats, 303 in the Dominican League as a 17-year-old. Last year went stateside, played Myrtle Beach at 268, 7 home runs, 13 stolen bases, struck out 61 times in 70 games. There's something to like there. Still playing shortstop. Probably a little bit undersized, but there's enough profile there. And when you're in an organization that has, like I mentioned before, you have dudes, so people have eyes on you. And if you can just get the attention, you're going to get more attention. So, I mean, he's a name that I think really has a chance as an 18-year-old to jump up. I guess how do you feel about that? Do you have other guys that?
That's a great one. Trianos was going to be mine, and you already mentioned him, right? Because he's on from my memory, and I should have checked them all before, but he was only on 1 or 2 top 100
Right.
list, right? And like fringy kind of at the bottom. And obviously there's so much kind of grounded in the hit tool with him, but he just keeps producing, right? And I think we're both a little bit leery of guys that kind of have one carrying tool and not much else to prop up the value potentially. Like if we remember back a few years ago when Luis Ariz was just hitting 340 at every minor league level, the conversation was like, well, eventually tougher competition, that's going to let up, and there's not a bunch else to be excited about, and it just never did. Now, obviously, Luis Arraez is a freak. He's like a unicorn hand-eye coordination guy, and I'm not saying James Trianos is that, but his track record is just consistent performance, and I think if he continues that in 2024, he's just going to be an inevitable back-end top 100 guy as at the front end of the top 100, we're seeing more and more guys graduate lists sooner as organizations are bringing up their guys, and top prospects are breaking camp with organizations and major league teams more frequently. So here'd be mine.
And the Tennessee team this year, especially early, is going to be fun to watch. And I think, did they do minor league stuff is on MLB TV now, right? It was last year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a team that would be fun to watch just for the prospect watching, because I think at the beginning of the season they'll start with a lot of dudes on that team.
For sure. Maybe we should do that on a future episode. It's like every org's best minor league team to start the season after rosters are released. All right, we're at about an hour here. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap this up. Next week we will finish up our top 20 prospect string of episodes with the Twins. I'm just going to preview that one is probably going to run long. We're going to have Theo on the show joining us. There's going to be a third person, third set of perspectives. That should be really fun. We'll also update on any additional spring training stuff, news and notes from any of those three orgs. And then, my friend, it is full steam ahead on the draft, and I'm excited. As always, appreciate you guys checking out the show. And we'll be back for more next week. Until then, take it easy.